This week on the Walk On podcast.
It seems in a really fundamental way, style is so personal, right? And it feels almost touchy.
You know, in the workplace, this isn't water cooler talk. You're not going to go to the lunchroom and someone's going to say, I don't really feel like I'm showing up the way I need to show up as a vice president. I think I need help. And it's not water cooler talk. It's really intimate. You run into a lot of memories and emotions, and when you're dealing with wardrobe, money issues, right? And it is a different level of intimacy.
I can't believe you didn't notice.
Well, welcome to the Walk On podcast. This is actually going to be the first episode of season 4, so welcome in. If you're new here, we appreciate you joining. If you've been here before, thanks for continuing to listen. At this point, just a brief overview and introduction, right? This is a podcast about people living with purpose, finding their passion, and leading as they go. It started as a journey for me, really being someone who was trying to figure out what was going to move me. I've been a public relations professional for almost 30 years. It's hard for me to say that, but true. And I started to try and figure out what's next, and just it led me to having conversations with interesting people, doing interesting things, and really providing value through their experience. And so I couldn't be more excited to welcome on our guest, Eileen Nebhut today, CEO of Venus Rising. Venus Rising is a really interesting company. They're an image consulting business that works with people who see their style and or their wardrobes as obstacles to success. And we'll get into that a little bit. I really look forward to discussing this one element in particular. You know, for introductory purposes, Eileen's interest in style began early in life as she was navigating the challenges of being unusually tall and learning how to incorporate scale, proportion, and femininity into her style in order to feel confident. Lastly, I should say, Eileen and I have known each other for a number of years. We first met working together at the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, where we were trying to build an energy efficiency marketplace. So with that, Eileen, welcome on.
Oh my gosh. How many years has that been? That's been like a long time ago. Over
2011, yeah.
Right. It's been a while. I'm glad to be
flies.
here. Yeah, time flies. Thank you for having me. This is great.
Well, absolutely. And as I've been interviewing people, everybody's had something interesting to share. And, you know, my wife, who's not into business podcasts or really a lot of self-help, she was sort of wondering as an example of what am I going to get from this? And I think what she has reinforced for me is that everybody's got a unique experience. Everybody's got a unique story and how they got to their path. And I think yours is pretty fascinating. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, Eileen, and your journey to Venus Rising?
Well, so I didn't have one of those careers that looked like this. I had a career that looked like this. And you and I have known each other for a lot of that career. And I was always in the corporate world, I was always in strategic partnerships and business development. So when I first knew you, it was in the energy space. From there, it was fintech. So I became, part of P20, which you were a part of as well. And then from there, I went to work for private equity as director of acquisitions in Utah. And so actually that was after grad school. In between those two jobs, I went to grad school at Georgia Tech and got my global MBA. So all throughout the career, I always had that kind of 2-inch deep knowledge of every industry I was in because I was business development, relationship building, and strategic partnerships, but it didn't come from that industry. So when I lost the job, I was with that private equity firm in Utah for about a year and they let me go. And this is after grad school, so 2021. And they let me go. It wasn't a great cultural fit. And actually my last couple of jobs weren't great cultural fits. If you talk about, you as a brand and the entity you're working for. And when I was on the job market, I was experiencing a lot of issues and I think part of it is, okay, there's a little bit of ageism in the marketplace. And also there were things coming up, like I don't come from fintech. I don't come from energy. So I didn't have that deep knowledge that they want, that I was finding that employers wanted. So I wasn't getting the opportunities that I wanted to get on the job market. And at that point, I kind of looked at what I could do on my own. And side note, just to take everyone back a step or two, as you said, I'm 6'2", and I've lived in Africa, New York, and London And everywhere I've lived, I've always dressed everyone, not as a fashion thing, but as a power and branding thing. Everyone always came to me. I always could do it. So it's a thing I have. I cannot
Yeah.
decorate a house to save my life, but I can decorate you. So it's that kind of thing. So that's the backstory. So I thought at that moment it was post COVID, it was post grad school, it was post a couple of bad cultural fits for me. And I decided to become an entrepreneur and target these professionals who I used to work with in the corporate world who really needed this help with their branding. And that's how Venus Rising got started.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And boy, one of the things that keeps coming up in these podcasts is people who are finding their space. It comes from that authentic connection. And so what was that light bulb moment like for you where you're like, oh, I've always been the go-to stylist. I could turn that into a job.
Well, it happened. I'd like to say it happened all at once. It happened kind of gradually. My family and friends were always encouraging me to do this as a business. And I thought, no, it's just something I'm good at. Like, no, that's not a business. That's just something I'm good at.
Mhm.
And it's amazing what happens when you get fired from a job and when you are on the
Yeah.
job market and not getting, it's that necessity of, okay, I want to take charge. So I decided that my market was the corporate woman and sometimes man. I decided that I could turn it into a business. And I started out B2C, but it wasn't until a year into the business that I realized I could do B2B. And it wasn't 6 months
Mm.
after that where I'm now image coaching around the tie-in between branding and executive presence. So
Interesting.
I'm getting to that point where I can actually show the ROI and develop programming for businesses. But it was kind of an evolutionary thing. It just kind of
Yeah.
grew.
Well, I want to go back in a second, but let's start there. So what does that look like I'm really curious about the connection between brand and style that you mentioned you're starting to get together for some programmatic stuff.
So there is a book that is by a man named Paul Aldo, and it's called Understanding Executive Presence. And I've been coaching around this book for a while. So the tie-in comes like this. Everyone knows, you're a brand, I'm a brand, we're all brands. We have value, and we watch how we communicate and how we send messages and how we give presentations and all that sort of thing. But there wasn't really someone or a company that could help us align how we looked. I mean, we knew we needed to look good, so to speak,
Yep.
but not someone who could help us align that look with our brand, our values, and the corporate entity in which we work and kind of build the bridge between the two. So that's how I first started out. But upon reading Paul Aldo's book, there are 9 dimensions. This is interesting. If your listeners don't know this, it's an easy read. It's 150 pages. There are 9 dimensions or ways that we influence our executive presence. They're behaviors. So it's not something that's not in our control. It's not something you're born with, like the presidential voice. It's this myth that, oh, you're not going to get the promotion because you don't have executive presence. Can't really tell you what it is, but you don't have it kind of thing. So the book demystifies it. And of the 9 behaviors, the first 3 are passion, poise, and self-confidence. And those are the behaviors about us. The next 3 behaviors are about our messaging, and the next 3 behaviors are about our relationships. So the ones
Interesting.
about us are very, very distinctly linked to how we dress and how we compose ourselves and how we handle pressure. But they are he goes into detail about how they are tied to how you look. And often first impressions, that's the first, it's the first thing being seen by others is how you present yourself. So that's the tie-in.
Interesting. And so I imagine, and I've looked at your website and we've talked a little bit about it, but there really is going and helping people pick out wardrobe and designing wardrobe. But it sounds like what you're saying is there's something more fundamental about starting with who are you and what are you trying to project?
Yes. And what you just said is interesting because when I first started the business, I had all these execution strategies. Let's do this to your wardrobe. Let's do this to your
Mhm.
brand. And what I was finding out over time with feedback was a lot of potential clients didn't really know if they were ready for the execution stage. They were like, tell me more about branding. How does it affect me? What am I'm now on bigger and bigger stages. I don't really know how to handle it. I want that next level job. Can you coach me through it? So finally I was like, oh, I need to start with the coaching, the image coaching, and then
Mhm.
once they're ready to execute. So yeah, there's a lot of coaching that goes into the relationship at first.
Yeah, and I hadn't prepared this question, but I actually just had this question or conversation again recently. But I was talking to a family member, one of my in-laws, a number of years ago, and he had talked about he went shopping, and he's I think in his 50s, and went to sort of a hip store and bought some skinny jeans and some boots, and he was walking out the parking lot, and somebody's like, "Hey, Gramps, those look pretty good on you," or something to that that effect. And he was like, I just in my head there's a point in your life where you've sort of come into your own and we're sort of frozen in that age forever. And for me, that really is like my style, whatever that was, other than wearing bow ties for work, my style sort of was all over the place until I was about 35. And then it was, to me, pretty clear. And if I reflect upon that, that's really the base of my perception today. So how do you deal with where someone's perception is? And if they're, wow, man, that was, 15, 20 years ago, we gotta break that and get you to where you are. How do you navigate that self-awareness or lack of self-awareness?
It helps that they come to me. So I'm not
Mhm.
knocking on doors going, Michael, hey, you could really use some help. So,
That bow tie is really out of date.
right, let's talk about your neckwear. So it helps whatever the pain point is, they've hit something. They've hit some
Yeah.
sort of pain point when they come to Venus Rising. So to a certain degree, I think they're open to some extent. And oftentimes they'll talk about what you just mentioned. I'm 40, not 39. I'm on 2 corporate boards, not just president of my company. So most often, I think they don't have the time. They don't want to spend their time doing this. They recognize that they need the help, and to have a brand partner in the background is like tick the box, move on. It allows them to do what they do
Mhm.
really well. But the short answer to your question is I think there's a certain degree of awareness for them to it's like executive coaching. It's like any kind of coaching. There's some
Yeah.
sort of awareness for them to have knocked on the door at the first place.
Yeah. And I imagine, so like, as I'm growing in the world of executive leadership and performance coaching, some of those folks are sent to me by a company, right? This is a benefit that they offer. This is maybe you need some coaching. Are you finding many people that, their organization is saying, hey, is a growth opportunity, we're going to send you to someone like Eileen?
I would love for that to happen. What has happened is, I started out B2C and I'm moving into B2B, still doing both. But my first B2B client was Cox Enterprises. And Cox hired me to work with 2 of their 5 top executives for a big onstage moment last year. The work ended up we ended up working together 4 months. But what was interesting to your point is the corporate entity hired me. So
Mhm.
then I go meet with the executives and they're like,
What do you mean?
"What are you saying? Whoa,
Yeah.
what? I don't know you." And so
Yeah.
honestly, we joke about it, but it took some time to say,
Yeah.
it's about making sure that you are very comfortable and very much yourself on stage, and that you're also in a branding scenario that is in line with the corporate brand, and they're going to be pictures for years, and I'm just here to help. But it was so different than, to your point, being hired directly by the client.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
so different, and it
Yeah.
just took a minute, and it worked out really well, I will say, touch wood. But that's a different thing. I'd love to have more of that problem going after more
Yeah.
of these corporate clients. Yeah.
It seems in a really fundamental way, style is so personal, right? And it feels almost touchy, right? Like
Oh yeah.
and so how do you navigate that? You said people are coming to you, but still you have to be appearance and how we carry ourselves does feel very different than when I'm working with someone, even though I might be working with what's inside their head and what's inside their heart. That seems personal in a very different way than what you're working on.
You know, stop me if I don't answer the question. That I think you're right. And so, as I say, I just gave a talk last week at Auburn, which you know about. And one of the things I said to them was like, in the workplace, this isn't water cooler talk. Like, you're not going to go to the lunchroom and someone's going to say, you know what? I don't really feel like I'm showing up the way I need to show up as a vice president. I think I need help. And it's not water cooler
Mhm.
talk. It's really intimate. Um,
Yeah.
and I liken myself when I have new clients, I liken myself to the nurse in the delivery room because when I'm working with clients in their closet, I mean, they're like naked, trying on clothes, and I'm like
Yeah.
trying to help
Yeah.
them, and that trust level is really high, really quickly. And you're right,
Yeah.
there's much like coaching, you run into a lot of memories and emotions, and when you're dealing with wardrobe, money issues, right? So there's a
Yeah.
lot to
Yeah.
work through, and it is a different level of intimacy.
Yeah. So you mentioned that personal level. Let's go back then to one of the questions that I sort of teed up at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience growing up and how you really leverage style?
You mean to do with my height?
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my
Because you put
gosh.
that out there as one of your distinct markers.
Yeah. And I hadn't thought about it. I'm in a TEDx speaker cohort that's helping me get more comfortable speaking. And I don't necessarily want to be on a TEDx stage, but I want to be able to talk about the business in a better way. So it's just good speaking coaching. But we've had to put together a talk. And of course, you're not talking about your company. You're a thought leader. So you're putting together some
Yeah.
TEDx like talk. Well, she said, think about what makes you happy. Think about what makes you angry. So I went home one night and I was thinking through her things and I was like angry. And all of this emotion came up about my height through the years because I was 6 feet tall in eighth grade and I'm 6'2" now. And that's, statistically speaking, less than 1% of the American women are 6 foot and over.
Mhm.
And 4% of American men are 6'2" and over. So when I walk into any room with most of my shoes, I'm 6'4". There's
Yeah.
nothing I can do about that. There's absolutely nothing.
Right.
So to answer your question, it was really hard being young and dealing with this and being a young woman. And not only was it hard, like in school and in college, but then you get into the workforce and my height, women who are taller than men, there's some basic societal assumptions that get messed with. And depending on the man, it can be a challenge in the workplace. And it's not like weight or hair color that you can change, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing you
Yeah.
can do about it. So it has been a challenge. I won't say it's all bad, but it's definitely. To give you an example, I remember walking down, I used to live in New York, and I'd walk down the streets in the winter to go home, and I'd walk up Fifth Avenue to cut over to the east side on Third. And I remember wearing a hat and a coat. And women, I don't know if you've seen this in New York, but when you're kind of not sure who's behind you and you not like something, you kind of look at the window, like the store
Yeah.
window, and pretend like you're shopping. Women used
Yeah.
to duck into windows and pretend like they were shopping because my shadow would cast over them. And they
Interesting.
assumed I was a threat or a man or both.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you the number of times recently, Michael, where I will park and give my car to a valet and they'll say, "Yes, sir." Or I
Wow.
will check out of a grocery store and they will say, "Thank you, sir." And they're not looking up necessarily. They're just making
Right.
assumptions.
Yeah.
So there's a million stories. So for this TEDx talk, I'm just like collecting this database of all these things. And like I say, it's not all bad, but I
Yeah.
had to figure out how to put myself together in a way that wasn't masculine looking because I'm tall
Mhm.
and not, and shoes are a big part of it. Like, what can I wear that's, with
Yeah.
lower heels or flats or so? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
long-winded answer, but it's taken a long time.
Yeah. And I actually remember one day when we were working together, back in 2011 or so, and you had talked about a man on an elevator had felt comfortable commenting on your height. And I was just sort of floored and taken aback. And you were like, it happens all the time. And uh, really fascinating. And then how you bring that forward and how do I show up? What do I wear? It's a really interesting connection.
Yes, and it's one that I'm getting more and more comfortable talking about because, and again, I did this at Auburn last week. I started the talk with a story that happened in New York. It's similar to the one you're talking about. And I started that way to be vulnerable because I'm talking about something that's very vulnerable. And if I don't go
Yeah.
there, it makes it harder for them to connect.
Yeah.
So I'm making that more a part of how I talk about me and why I'm so passionate about the business.
Yeah. And how did that at Auburn, when you recently did the presentation, how did that feel to walk in and sort of set the scene with opening yourself up to a group of students?
It was very odd. It was at the Harvard School of Business, and I lectured at 3 classes back to back, and they were each an hour and 15 minutes. 2 were sales classes, 1 was new venture creation, 40 students each. And I had a whole slide deck. I had a whole presentation, but the second slide was my story. And Michael, you could have blown me over with a feather. More of the young men in the class than the women came up to me, connected with me on LinkedIn, told me how amazing the story was. And there were a couple of women actually in the class who were close to my height who came up. And so it really, I think it broke some ice. And I was
Mhm.
surprised by how many of the young men in the class have really reached out and wanted to connect and told me how much they learned. And I think starting out with a vulnerable note kind of helped with that.
Yeah. Really fascinating. Well, I want to talk about the vulnerable notes of your process. So you get a client. What does that process look like? Someone signs up and probably comes from maybe what percentage of your potential customers or clients who are coming in the door come from a place of vulnerability that this isn't working for me versus maybe like, oh, I just need to put not a bow, but I just need to like, sort of pull this all together a little bit and then I'm off to the races. What is that dynamic when the people that are coming to you who are seeking your help?
So there's different programs that we offer. At the far end is the image coaching, right? It's on Zoom. It's getting their mind around it. But when we start actually working together on execution, we've got a program that's called the Quick Start Capsule Program. So if someone just wants to tie a bow on it, like you say, we work with them for
Yeah.
a month. We use technology, so we're tech friendly. We've got an app that allows us to manage all of their looks and their wardrobe and everything. So we get them, we upload pictures to the app, we put some looks together, we have a few phone calls with them, and by the end of the month, they have a capsule wardrobe. So that's people who want, just tie the bow on. I have other
Yeah.
clients who are hair on fire. Something's got to happen. Something's got to happen now. I've got a trip or I've got an event or an award or a book.
Mhm.
Most of the clients are long-term clients. Again, we're using the app, but they're monthly subscribers where we share a calendar. I have monthly calls with them. I know what's coming up in their calendar. I know where they're traveling. I know when they're speaking. I know when they're presenting. I know when they're a guest. I know all of those things, and the team and I put together looks for every day of the week. So they literally have to open up their phone, walk into their closet, tap the app,
Wow.
and it just means they can do what they do really well
Yeah.
and not have to worry about their branding angle.
Yeah.
So I think it's more on that end, that monthly, like month to month clients who are just wanting someone to do it on the back end. But I do have
Yeah.
those shorter term engagements.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. So what are if you had advice, and maybe you can't because your process is a little more involved and personal, but have you had advice for people who are thinking about, I really do need to put some thought into or bring change to my presence and style? How do what are some of the core recommendations that you would have them think about?
So one is know your colors. And that's not
Hmm.
really hard to do these days. If anyone uses AI, Claude is a good way. If you upload a picture, you can get your colors done pretty simply.
Interesting.
It's not perfect. There are better ways to
Sure.
get your colors done, but you can do it that way. Two is know your brands. And by brands, I mean, how do you need to show up? So for you, Michael, you might need one brand for your podcast. You might need another
Yeah.
brand if you're running for public office. You might need another brand. So it's really to do with who are your audiences. Where
Mhm.
are you and what are your audiences? So know those categories. Third one is you'd be surprised how many people of all ages haven't done this, but go into your closet and things that are damaged, either move them to a different closet or get rid of them. And damage means worn, torn, stained, or has odors. Like there's some pretty basic things, and we just don't do it on a regular basis. So getting those out really helps. And the fun one is what I call it the one word exercise. And so what it is basically is, and I did this with all of our students, this is fun. Imagine you're walking into a room of 50 people, they don't know you, and you don't say a word. You get up on stage and you haven't said a word. First impressions are made, by the way, in the first, 3-5 seconds.
Mhm.
So you're standing there, they don't know you from Eve, and I use myself as an example. What is the one word that you want them to think about when they see you? And normally it's an adjective: professional, approachable, friendly, knowledgeable, whatever it is. What is the one word? So it's helping people get in the mindset of, I'm a brand. What brand do I want to project? So the whole idea, I mean, the 30,000 foot idea is, if you're not taking charge of that, if you're not thinking about that first
Yeah.
impact, you're leaving a lot to chance. So there's a series of things, but those are a few steps that I go through with clients just to get them kind of in the mindset.
As you were sharing the one example, I was having a triggered moment where I remember back when I used to be in the dating world, I went on a date and I had a sweater and I thought I was put together pretty well. And it was a sweater that I loved. And it was one of those things where in my head, it had in strategic areas, a couple like holes, like worn. And to me, I thought it was evoking like, hey, I'm showing up on this date. I'm comfortable. It's one of my favorite sweaters. It's just part of me. And the person on the date, it was like one of the first things she pointed out, and it was like an ew. It was like, oh, yeah. And I was like, oh, no, like really, and she wouldn't let it go. And it was sort of like, I couldn't afford a new sweater. Obviously, it didn't work out, but it was really fascinating. So know your audience. And I think about that too, as I show up, I've got clients who you wear a suit and tie. I'm an elected official in a small town that's a resort town. And if I show up in a suit and tie, I feel very uncomfortable. And so I always try to remember, how do I still be me, but bring that forward into the audience I'm entering? I want to be me, but not stand out in a way that makes me look like an outlier. And that feels like a really hard thing to do sometimes.
It is hard to do, but you've nailed it. I mean, that's a lot of what I do when I'm working with clients. The other thing that I wanted to mention quickly about helping them is sometimes we talk about when they're really having a hard time getting off the block and they're not sure what brand they want to be and they don't know where to start. We do a brand personification. So I say, who's someone famous? A newscaster, an actress, an actor.
Yeah.
Who's someone famous who you thought, if I walked into work and I could look like that, I'd really knock it out of the park. So it's funny. At first people are like, oh, I don't know. And then, by the next call, they're like, oh, I thought of something. Like, did you watch Ted Lasso?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So Hannah Waddingham
Yes.
has been the brand personification for like 3 of my clients. And there's
Yeah.
good reason. She's not a size 2. She's not 25. She owns her curves and her power and her height and all of it so well. And so it's fun to get, and then you're like, okay, why do you like that? Is it, the clothes? So then you kind of back into, okay, let's talk about what you like, which aspects. And then it kind of helps
Yeah.
to break that down.
Yeah. It sounds like through this process, you're also helping people really hone in on who they are.
Yes. And I was talking to a potential client a couple of weeks ago, and she'd reached out to me, a senior exec at a big Fortune 500. And 20 minutes into the talk, she said, I'm not sure whether I need image consulting from you or whether I need executive coaching. And I was like, well, they're not mutually exclusive. And
Right.
what you probably need both. And I'm I know a lot of coaches, and I put together a package
Mhm.
of a 6-month dual program of image and
Yep.
executive. And yes, it does help people hone in on what's their aspirations, what's their
Yeah.
values, what do they want to be, like how do they want to show up, and it's really fun to get to see that transformation.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And that is one of the questions as an leadership coach I ask all the time is, in this situation, how do you want to show up? Who do you want to be? And,
Mhm.
you know, that physical manifestation, we don't talk about that a lot, but that certainly is an extension and is absolutely, I think you're right, a perfect match. And I think really particularly as women in the workforce, I think, I think men, unfortunately, we can show up as a tech bro and have a vest on and,
Oh my God,
khakis or,
you can.
or I can be the most powerful business in the world and the founder of it. And I can wear a hoodie, and that counts. And I think there is an inequity there that men don't necessarily have to put as much thought into, I think, on a generalization, surely, but I think they get more leeway to, oh, that's just him being him.
I think you're right. And I've had this conversation recently. I was in San Francisco in November speaking to women corporate directors at the San Francisco Yacht Club. So it's 24 women, the Bay Area chapter. And these are women who are all sitting on corporate boards, many of them. And I kind of knew what they wanted to talk about. So I kind of focused the talk. These were all women over 50 and then some. They are all president of their tech company headquartered in San Francisco. They all
Yep.
sit on 3 corporate boards. They're traveling globally. And what their pain, we're all the same. So we're all the same. But their pain point was to stay relevant. Women are judged much more harshly than men. And
Yeah.
they're not 25 anymore, 35 or even 45, yet they're
Yeah.
still top of their game and then some. So it's
Yeah.
not about looking like someone else or looking a different age. It's they've got busy lives. They're not necessarily on top of this.
Yeah.
And it's using this as a lever because you're not going back to school, right? You've got your education.
Right.
You're not climbing a
Yeah.
ladder. You're at the top. What other
Yeah.
things can we use to make sure that you are seen, understood, and remembered, and that you stay relevant?
Yeah.
And that's an important lever.
Wow, there were a lot of really important pieces in that. I think as I want to be respectful of your time as we head to the back of this interview, what are your key takeaways from this journey? What are you finding out about yourself as you've really landed in this place, which clearly to me, as someone who's known you a little while, it seems to really resonate and be a great fit for you. So what are you taking from this experience and this journey?
Um, it takes more work than I realized to be an entrepreneur. One of the Auburn classes asked me this. They're like, "What's the hardest thing that you've learned?" And I had to sit there and think about it. I thought if you put a company together and you put a website together and you put some marketing materials out there, that the business would just pour in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm in a CEO coaching program right now for 6 months. It's kind of like going back to grad school. And one of the things I learned halfway through is like, oh, I'm marketing, but I'm not selling.
Yeah.
So it's just things like that. You think you're figuring it out, and then you realize a couple of weeks later that you're doing everything wrong. So you have to be resilient. We started out the call before we started recording. I take
Yeah.
5 steps forward and 10 steps
Yes.
back sometimes, like this week. It's really, you have to have nerve. Your skin has to be pretty thick.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that it's exhausting. It's really rewarding. And I love the client responses,
Mhm.
that I always use their success metrics. Where are we now? What does success look like when we get there?
Yeah.
That's gold. So it makes it
Yeah.
really fun.
Yeah, I always, when people asked about entrepreneurship, I think one of the things that always comes back for me is no matter what you're working on, branding, revenue, client recruitment, you start every day from zero, right? It doesn't really matter what you did yesterday because today you've got new problems you've got to tackle, new opportunities to leverage, or I've still just got to pay the bills in a way that other people don't when they're showing up at work. And it does require resilience. I agree with you 100%. But, we get the opportunities to direct things in a way we want, to create brands and organizations and initiatives that are really true to the things that we hold dear and find important and then give us purpose and passion.
I agree. And meeting the people I've met along the way, clients and just networking and speaking opportunities, it's just I've met the most interesting people. So it's been great. 2 years in, it's been great.
Well, fantastic. Well, Eileen, where can people find out more about Venus Rising and your work?
Website is probably the easiest, or LinkedIn, they can find me, but the website is venusrisingagency.com.
Perfect. Well, I've enjoyed catching up with you. It's always good to see you, and I love hearing your journey, and we'll continue to watch. So thanks for being on.
Thank you so much.
And this is the Walk On podcast, people leading with passion and purpose, providing a roadmap for your personal journey. Hear their stories, find your passion, walk on. Again, Eileen, thanks.
Thank you.
Well, I was hanging